The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence of Bagram Airfield like a serrated blade. Staff Sergeant Kira, Ghostwriter, Volkov was already suited up, her flight helmet tucked under her arm as she walked toward the flight line. The mission briefing had been too sparse for comfort. Intelligence suggested a high-value target in the Korangal Valley, but the details felt deliberately vague, like someone was hiding something behind classified stamps and redacted paragraphs. What they didn't tell her was that the target had a name she'd recognize. What they couldn't have predicted was that her F-16C Fighting Falcon would write that name across the Afghan sky in contrails visible for 30 miles, freezing an entire SEAL team mid-operation as they watched something impossible unfold above their heads. The mystery began 3 days earlier when satellite imagery picked up unusual movement in a compound that had been dormant for 18 months. The structure sat like a concrete scar against the mountainside, its walls thick enough to withstand most conventional ordnance. But this wasn't about the building. It was about who intelligence believed was inside. The targeting package arrived with a priority classification that made seasoned officers pause mid-coffee and junior analysts double-check their security clearances. Kira had earned her call sign Ghostwriter not for stealth, but for precision that bordered on the supernatural. Her ordnance placement was so exact that fellow pilots joked she could thread a needle from 30,000 feet. What they didn't joke about was the way she joined the Air Force after her brother died in Fallujah, or how she'd clawed her way through flight school despite instructors who thought women belonged in transport aircraft, not fighters. The F-16 waited on the tarmac like a metallic predator, its single Pratt and Whitney engine cold, but ready to roar to life with 29,000 pounds of thrust. Ground crew moved around the aircraft with practiced efficiency, loading AGM-65 Maverick missiles and checking fuel lines. The pre-flight inspection revealed nothing unusual. Hydraulics green, avionics nominal, weapons systems armed and ready. But something felt wrong. Maybe it was the way the mission commander avoided eye contact during the briefing, or how the intelligence officer's hands trembled slightly when she handed over the target photos. Perhaps it was simply pilot intuition, that sixth sense that keeps aviators alive when technology fails and protocols crumble. As Kira climbed into the cockpit and began her startup sequence, she had no idea that in less than 2 hours, she would be staring at a target that would force her to choose between following orders and confronting a ghost from her past. A ghost that surveillance photos suggested was very much alive and waiting in that concrete compound, 30 miles away in mountains that had already claimed too many American lives. The engine spooled up with a rising whine that cut through the morning air. Somewhere in the Korangal Valley, Navy SEALs were moving into position for what they believed would be a routine close air support mission. None of them knew they were about to witness something that would redefine their understanding of precision, sacrifice, and the weight of a single name written in vapor against an Afghan dawn. The first hint of what was coming arrived over the radio as Kira taxied toward the runway. Ghostwriter, be advised, target has been confirmed mobile. Repeat, target is mobile and potentially changing location. The voice belonged to Captain Marcus Reaper Santos, the forward air controller embedded with the SEAL team. His tone carried an edge that suggested this mission had already deviated from the plan. Kira keyed her mic. Copy, Reaper. Ghostwriter is wheels up in 60 seconds. What's the nature of target movement? She guided the F-16 onto the runway, feeling the familiar weight of 17,000 pounds of aircraft responding to her touch. The HUD displayed green across all systems, engine temperature optimal, weapons armed, navigation systems locked onto the target coordinates that would take her into the heart of Taliban-controlled territory. Unknown at this time, Santos replied, but something in his voice suggested he knew more than he was sharing. Satellite lost visual contact approximately 15 minutes ago. Cloud cover is moving in fast, and we're getting interference on thermal imaging. The mission was already falling apart, and they hadn't even left the ground. Kira advanced the throttle, feeling the Pratt and Whitney engine surge to full military power. The F-16 accelerated down the runway with violent grace, the nose wheel lifting at 180 knots as Afghanistan fell away beneath her wings. Within seconds, she was climbing through 8,000 feet, the Hindu Kush mountains spreading like broken teeth across the horizon. At 25,000 feet, Kira leveled off and checked her systems again. The AGM-65 Mavericks hung heavy under her wings, precision-guided missiles capable of penetrating concrete bunkers with surgical accuracy. Each weapon cost more than most people earned in a year, but in a theater where American lives hung in the balance, cost calculations became irrelevant. "Ghost Rider Reaper," Santos called over the radio. "SEAL team is in position. We have eyes on the compound, but something's not right. The target appears to be writing something in the courtyard." Kira frowned inside her helmet. "Writing something? Can you be more specific?" "Negative. Too far for visual confirmation, and our scopes are having trouble with the distance and light conditions. But it looks like letters or symbols drawn in the dirt, large enough to be seen from altitude." The first chill of recognition ran down Kira's spine, though she couldn't yet articulate why. She began her descent toward the target area, the F-16 cutting through thin mountain air at 450 knots. Below, the landscape revealed itself in brutal detail: rocky outcroppings, dried riverbeds, and scattered compounds that could hide anything from civilians to high-value targets. "Reaper, Ghost Rider is beginning approach. Request confirmation on rules of engagement and civilian presence in the target area." Standard protocol, but Kira's voice carried a tension that hadn't been there during takeoff. "Row is weapons tight until positive target identification. Civilian presence unknown. Assume presence and adjust accordingly." Santos paused, then added, "Ghost Rider, be advised that target identification may be complicated. Stand by for further guidance." The words hung in the air like a threat. At 15,000 feet, Kira could see the compound through her targeting pod, a rectangular structure with thick walls and a central courtyard. The satellite imagery hadn't done justice to its isolation. It sat alone on a ridgeline like a fortress, commanding views of the valley approaches. But it was what she saw in the courtyard that made her blood freeze. Letters, carved or drawn in the dirt with deliberate precision, large enough to read from altitude, arranged in a pattern that looked almost like a message. "Reaper, Ghost Rider has visual on target compound. Confirm. Is the target attempting to communicate via ground markings?" Static filled the radio for several seconds before Santos responded. That's what we're trying to determine. SEAL team is moving closer for positive identification, but initial assessment suggests the markings may be intended for aerial observation." Kira began her targeting run, the HUD painting the compound in green crosshairs, while the Maverick missiles locked onto the structure's thermal signature. Standard procedure would be to eliminate the target without hesitation. The intelligence package had been clear that this was a time-sensitive strike against a high-value individual who posed an immediate threat to American forces. But those letters in the courtyard seemed to pulse with significance, as if they contained information that could change everything about this mission. The SEAL team's position crackled over the radio. "Reaper, Bravo team has eyes on target through long-range optics. Target appears to be a single individual, male, approximately 6 feet tall. He's continuing to work on the ground markings." "Can you make out what he's writing?" Kira asked, her finger hovering over the weapon release. Another pause, longer this time. When Santos spoke again, his voice carried a strain that suggested whatever the SEALs were seeing had caught them completely off guard. "Ghost Rider, the target appears to be writing a name, American name. We're trying to confirm, but it looks like he's spelling out Victor." The F-16 shuddered slightly as Kira's hand involuntarily tightened on the stick. "Victor." Her older brother's name. The brother who had died in an IED explosion in Fallujah 7 years ago, whose death had driven her to join the Air Force and fight her way into a fighter cockpit, despite every obstacle the military bureaucracy could place in her path. But Victor was dead. She'd attended his funeral, watched his flag-draped coffin disappear into Arlington soil, carried his dog tags in her flight suit pocket for every mission she'd flown since earning her wings. Repeat last, Reaper. Did you say Victor? Affirmative. Target has completed the first name and is beginning work on what appears to be a surname. VOLKOV. The radio fell silent except for the ambient noise of the SEAL team's breathing and equipment. 30,000 feet above the Korangal Valley, Kira Volkov stared at her targeting display and tried to process information that contradicted everything she thought she knew about her brother's death. Viktor Volkov, her brother's full name, being written in the dirt by someone who intelligence claimed was a high-value Taliban target requiring immediate elimination. The impossible had just become terrifyingly possible. Ghost Rider Reaper, Santos called, his voice tight with confusion. Target has stopped writing and is now looking directly up at your aircraft. He appears to be waving. Through her targeting pod, Kira could see the figure in the compound's courtyard. Tall, wearing civilian clothes, standing next to letters carved deep enough into the earth to be visible from her altitude. The man was indeed looking up, one hand raised in what could be interpreted as either surrender or greeting. The face was too distant to distinguish clearly, but something about the posture, the way he stood with shoulders slightly hunched forward, triggered a memory so visceral that Kira's hands trembled on the flight controls. "All stations, this is Ghost Rider," she announced over the radio, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "I need immediate confirmation of target identity before weapons release. Something about this situation doesn't match the intelligence briefing." The operations center at Bagram came online. "Ghost Rider, this is Falcon Base. Intelligence assessment remains unchanged. Target is confirmed hostile, immediate elimination authorized. Execute strike mission as briefed." But intelligence assessments could be wrong. Kira had seen enough classified reports to know that certainty was often constructed from fragments of information, assumptions built on incomplete data. The intelligence community dealt in probabilities, not absolutes, and somewhere in that margin of error lay the difference between eliminating a terrorist and killing someone who might be. The thought was too dangerous to complete. "Reaper, can your team get closer for positive visual identification? I need to see this target's face before weapons release." "Negative, Ghost Rider. Taliban activity in the area is too heavy for closer approach. We're at maximum effective range for observation, and local security is deteriorating rapidly. Window for strike is closing." Kira circled the compound at 20,000 feet, buying time while her mind raced through possibilities. If the target was indeed her brother, somehow, impossibly alive after 7 years, then the entire mission was based on false intelligence. But if she was wrong, if grief and wishful thinking were clouding her judgment, then hesitation could cost American lives. The letters in the courtyard seemed to mock her indecision. VIKTOR-VOLKOV, carved with deliberate precision, impossible to ignore or misinterpret. Falcon Base. Ghost Rider requests immediate contact with intelligence regarding target background and confirmation of deceased American personnel, potentially matching target description. Ghost Rider Falcon Base. Negative on intelligence review. Mission is time-critical, execute as briefed. The voice from operations carried the weight of command authority, but Kira had learned to trust her instincts more than headquarters assessments. 7 years of combat missions had taught her that survival often depended on questioning orders that felt wrong, especially when, those orders came with urgent timelines and classified justifications. Below, the figure in the compound had moved to the center of the courtyard, still looking up at her aircraft. At this distance, through the targeting pod's grainy display, facial recognition was impossible. But body language spoke volumes, and nothing about this person's behavior matched intelligence assessments of a terrorist leader. Instead, he stood like someone waiting for recognition, arms at his sides, completely exposed to attack from above. The tactical situation deteriorated as Santos reported increased radio chatter, indicating Taliban forces moving toward the SEAL team's position. Ghostwriter, we need that strike now. Enemy activity is spiking, and we may need immediate extraction if you don't engage the target. The weight of command decision settled on Kira's shoulders like lead. American lives depended on her following orders, but something deeper, call it intuition, call it hope, call it the ghost of a brother she'd never properly mourned, demanded answers before action. She made a choice that would either save lives or end her military career. All stations, Ghostwriter is making a low pass for visual confirmation before weapons release. Maintain position and stand by. The F-16 dove toward the compound with controlled violence, Pratt and Whitney engine screaming as Kira descended through 15,000 feet at nearly 600 knots. The compound grew larger in her windscreen, details sharpening with each second of descent. She could see individual stones in the courtyard walls, the texture of the letters carved into the earth, and finally, at 8,000 feet, the face of the man who had written her brother's name in Afghan soil. The recognition hit like a physical blow. It was Victor. Older, weathered by years in a harsh climate, bearing scars that hadn't existed when she'd last seen him alive, but unmistakably her brother. The same dark eyes, the same slightly crooked nose broken in a childhood accident, the same way of standing with his weight shifted to his left foot to compensate for an old football injury. Her brother, who was supposed to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery, was standing in a Taliban compound in the Korangal Valley, looking up at her F-16 with an expression of desperate hope. The impossible had become undeniably real. Kira pulled out of her dive at 3,000 feet, climbing rapidly while her mind struggled to process what she'd seen. The radio exploded with urgent transmissions as ground controllers demanded to know why she hadn't engaged the target, but she barely heard them over the roar of blood in her ears. Victor was alive. Somehow, 7 years after his reported death in Iraq, her brother was alive and waiting for her in an Afghan compound that intelligence wanted destroyed with him inside. The targeting system still showed a green lock on the building below. The Maverick missiles hung ready under her wings, their guidance systems fixed on a structure that contained the one person she'd thought she'd lost forever. One trigger pull would complete the mission as briefed and eliminate any possibility of answers. But it would also make her Victor's executioner. Ghostwriter Falcon Base. Immediate weapons release required. Do not deviate from mission parameters. The voice from operations carried barely controlled urgency, suggesting that people much higher in the chain of command were monitoring this mission in real time. Kira keyed her mic, her voice steady despite the emotional storm raging in her chest. Falcon Base, Ghostwriter has positive identification of American personnel in target area. Request immediate mission abort and extraction coordination. Silence filled the radio frequency for several seconds before Falcon Base responded with barely controlled fury. Ghostwriter, intelligence assessment shows no American personnel in target area. You are ordered to complete strike mission immediately. Negative, Falcon Base. I have visual confirmation of American personnel requiring immediate extraction. Target facility is not clear for engagement. The standoff crystallized in those words. On one side stood military protocol, intelligence assessments, and the weight of operational necessity. On the other side stood a pilot's certain knowledge that her brother, somehow, impossibly, was alive and looking up at her through Afghan sky. Santos broke the deadlock with a transmission that carried the weight of impending disaster. All stations, Bravo team is under fire. Repeat, we are taking effective enemy fire from multiple positions. Request immediate air support or extraction. Our position is compromised. The tactical situation had collapsed while Kira grappled with personal revelation. The SEAL team needed immediate support. Enemy forces were converging on their position, and a single American stood in a compound that might be the key to understanding intelligence failures that had lasted 7 years. Time was running out for everyone. Kira made the decision that would define the rest of her military career and possibly her life. Instead of engaging the compound, she redirected her targeting systems toward the Taliban positions threatening the SEAL team. The Maverick missiles locked onto muzzle flashes and thermal signatures that clearly represented hostile activity. Reaper, Ghostwriter has multiple hostile positions targeted, clearing fires on Taliban positions surrounding your location. Danger close, mark your position with IR strobes. The AGM-65s released from their pylons with metallic clicks that Kira felt through the airframe. 2 precision-guided missiles streaked toward Earth, their courses programmed to eliminate the immediate threat to American forces while preserving the compound and Victor for potential extraction. Twin explosions bloomed against the mountainside as the Mavericks found their targets. Secondary detonations suggested ammunition caches or fuel stores, sending pillars of black smoke into the morning sky. The immediate threat to the SEAL team evaporated in precisely controlled violence. Reaper, Ghostwriter, Taliban positions eliminated. What's your status? Ghostwriter, Reaper, outstanding work. Threat neutralized. We're green across the board. Santos paused, then added, what's the status on primary target? Kira looked down at the compound where Victor still stood in the courtyard, now surrounded by drifting smoke from the nearby strikes. He hadn't moved during the attack, showing either complete trust in her accuracy or resignation to whatever fate awaited him. Reaper, primary target area requires immediate investigation before engagement. I need your team to approach and confirm target identity. Ghostwriter, that's outside our mission parameters. We're here for overwatch and forward air control, not ground investigation. The radio crackled with a new voice, deeper, older, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions under pressure. Ghostwriter, this is Colonel Morrison, Falcon Base Commander. You are ordered to engage primary target immediately or return to base for disciplinary action. The ultimatum hung in the air like a challenge. Engage Victor, possibly killing her brother, or face court-martial for disobeying direct orders in a combat zone. Either choice would end her career, but only one would let her live with herself afterward. Kira made her choice with the certainty that comes from understanding that some decisions transcend military protocol. Colonel Morrison, Ghostwriter, I am declaring emergency authority under wartime operational guidelines. American personnel in the target area require immediate extraction, not elimination. I will not engage until proper identification procedures are completed. Emergency authority was a rarely invoked provision that allowed field commanders to deviate from orders when American lives were at immediate risk. It was also a career-ending move, unless the situation justified such extreme measures. Through her targeting pod, Kira watched Victor move to a different position in the courtyard. He was arranging stones into a pattern that looked almost like an arrow, pointing toward what appeared to be a cave entrance carved into the compound's back wall. Whatever had kept Victor in this place for 7 years, whatever intelligence failure had led to him being classified as a Taliban target, the answers lay somewhere in that compound, and possibly in that cave. The radio fell silent as various command authorities undoubtedly discussed how to handle a pilot who had just declared emergency authority to avoid killing someone she believed to be her brother. Military careers had ended for lesser acts of insubordination, but Kira had passed the point where personal consequences mattered. What mattered was getting Victor home. Santos broke the silence with a transmission that suggested he'd been monitoring more than just tactical frequencies. Ghost Rider Reaper. Bravo team leader is willing to conduct approach and identification of primary target, pending higher authority approval. We copy your concern about American personnel. Permission to investigate rather than simply eliminate. It was more than Kira had dared hope for, and it came from ground forces who understood that the situation had become far more complex than anyone had anticipated. Falcon Base. Ghost Rider requests permission for SEAL team investigation of target compound prior to engagement. American personnel may require immediate extraction. Colonel Morrison's response carried the weight of someone who'd realized that the mission had spiraled beyond anyone's ability to control through standard protocols. Ghost Rider, permission granted for ground investigation. Weapons hold until further notice. The tactical situation had shifted from strike mission to potential rescue operation in the span of minutes. Below, Victor seemed to understand that circumstances were changing in his favor. He moved back to the carved letters of his name and sat down beside them, waiting with the patience of someone who'd been waiting for 7 years. Kira established a protective orbit around the compound, while the SEAL team began their careful approach. Through her sensors, she could track their movement up the ridgeline, using terrain features and tactical spacing that spoke to years of experience in similar environments. Ghost Rider Reaper. Bravo team is approximately 500 meters from target compound. We have visual on the individual in the courtyard. He appears calm and is making no threatening movements. Copy Reaper. Individual has been in place for the duration of my observation. No indication of hostile intent. What she didn't transmit was her growing certainty that Victor had been waiting specifically for her. The name carved in the courtyard wasn't coincidence. It was a message intended for someone who would recognize its significance. Someone who would question orders to eliminate a target bearing that name. The SEAL team's approach took 20 minutes, their movement careful and deliberate across terrain that could hide improvised explosive devices or enemy fighters. Kira maintained overwatch, her sensors sweeping the surrounding area for any threat to the ground team or the person they were approaching. At 50 meters from the compound, Santos made contact. Ghost Rider Reaper. We have clear visual on target individual. Male, approximately 40 years old, Caucasian, wearing civilian clothing. He's standing beside what are clearly deliberate ground markings spelling out Viktor Volkov in English. Kira's breath caught in her throat. Hearing her brother's name confirmed by ground forces made the impossible situation terrifyingly real. Reaper, can you confirm target identity? Is this person American military personnel? Stand by, Ghost Rider. The next few minutes stretched like hours as the SEAL team made their final approach. Through her targeting pod, Kira could see them moving with weapons ready but not raised, prepared for threat, but not assuming hostility. When Santos spoke again, his voice carried amazement that transcended professional composure. Ghost Rider Reaper. Target has identified himself as Master Sergeant Viktor Volkov, United States Army. He's requesting extraction and immediate contact with his sister, Air Force pilot call sign Ghost Rider. The words hit Kira with the force of revelation. Victor was alive. He'd somehow known she would be the pilot sent to eliminate him, and he'd been waiting for exactly this moment. 7 years of grief, 7 years of flying missions in his memory, 7 years of carrying dog tags that belonged to someone who wasn't actually dead. All of it collapsed into a single moment of recognition, across 30 miles of Afghan sky. Her brother was alive, and he was coming home. The radio exploded with transmissions as word of the situation spread through command channels. A strike mission had become a rescue operation. Intelligence assessments were being questioned at the highest levels, and somewhere in the military bureaucracy, people were scrambling to understand how an American soldier reported killed in action 7 years ago had ended up classified as a Taliban target, requiring elimination. But none of that mattered to Kira as she watched the SEAL team escort Victor away from the compound that had been his prison or refuge for 7 years. Whatever story explained his survival, whatever intelligence failures had led to this moment, whatever consequences awaited everyone involved, all of it was secondary to the simple fact that her brother was alive. Ghostwriter Reaper, package is secure and ready for extraction. Will need immediate helicopter support for exfiltration from LZ Alpha. Kira checked her fuel state and weapons load. She had enough fuel for extended overwatch and enough ordnance to deal with any threats that might emerge during the extraction. But more importantly, she had a brother to protect on his journey home. Reaper, Ghostwriter will maintain overhead protection until extraction is complete. All threats in the immediate area have been neutralized. As she established her protective orbit, Kira allowed herself a moment to process what had just happened. The mission that was supposed to end with her eliminating a high-value target had instead reunited her with family she'd thought lost forever. The sky above Afghanistan had become a place of miracles, written in vapor trails and carved names, witnessed by professionals who understood that sometimes the most important victories had nothing to do with destroying enemies and everything to do with bringing Americans home. Victor was alive, and Kira was bringing him home. The extraction helicopter appeared on Kira's radar as a friendly contact approaching from the southeast, a CH-47 Chinook with escort Apache, flying low and fast across terrain that had claimed too many American aircraft over the years. The formation moved with the precision of crews who'd conducted countless similar missions, but Kira knew this extraction was unlike any other. They were recovering a ghost. Ghostwriter, this is Rescue 6-1. We have your position and are inbound for package pickup. Request current threat assessment. Kira swept her sensors across the valley, checking for any signs of enemy activity that might threaten the extraction. The earlier Maverick strikes had scattered Taliban forces in the immediate area, but the sound of approaching helicopters would draw attention from anyone within miles. Rescue 6-1 Ghostwriter, target area is secure, immediate threats neutralized. Package is ready for pickup at LZ Alpha. Be advised, this is a sensitive extraction. Package has been missing for 7 years. Copy Ghostwriter. 7 years is a long time, we'll bring him home. The simple professionalism in the pilot's voice carried weight that transcended military protocol. These were people who understood that some missions mattered more than others, that some rescues carried significance beyond tactical success. Through her targeting pod, Kira watched the SEAL team move Victor toward the landing zone, a flat area of ground approximately 800 meters from the compound. He moved under his own power, requiring no medical assistance, but his gait suggested someone unaccustomed to rapid movement after years of confinement or hiding. What had he been doing for 7 years? How had he survived? Why had intelligence classified him as a Taliban target? The questions multiplied faster than answers, but they could wait until Victor was safely aboard the Chinook and headed toward American-controlled territory. The Apache escorts arrived first, their tandem rotors beating the air as they established a protective perimeter around the landing zone. Kira coordinated with their gunners, sharing target information and ensuring clear fields of fire in case enemy forces attempted to interfere with the extraction. Ghostwriter, this is Apache lead. We have eyes on the package and ground team. Individual appears healthy and mobile. What's the story on this guy? Kira hesitated before responding. The full truth, that she'd been sent to kill her own brother based on faulty intelligence, was too complex for tactical radio frequency. But these pilots deserved some explanation for why a routine strike mission had become an emergency extraction. Apache Lead package is American military personnel, previously classified as deceased. Intelligence failure led to misidentification as hostile target. Extraction is priority 1. Copy Ghost Rider. Will make sure he gets home safe. The Chinook touched down at LZ Alpha with the controlled violence of a combat landing, engines remaining at full power while the rear ramp dropped to receive passengers. The SEAL team moved Victor toward the aircraft with tactical efficiency, weapons ready to engage any threat that might emerge from the surrounding terrain. Through her optics, Kira watched her brother climb aboard the helicopter that would carry him away from 7 years of unknown hardship and back toward a world that had mourned his death and moved on without him. He paused at the top of the ramp and looked skyward, as if he could somehow see through the Chinook's hull to the F-16 circling overhead. The gesture lasted only seconds, but it carried the weight of gratitude that transcended words. Rescue 6-1 package is aboard. Thanks for bringing our guy home. Ghost Rider, it's what we do. Package appears stable and is asking about his sister. The words hit Kira with unexpected emotion. After 7 years of separation, Victor's first concern was for her, the sister who joined the Air Force to honor his memory and who just discovered that everything she thought she knew about his death was wrong. Tell him Ghost Rider is fine and we'll see him soon. The Chinook lifted off with its precious cargo, rotors churning dust and debris as it gained altitude and turned toward Bagram Airfield. The Apache escorts fell into formation on either side, their crews maintaining vigilant watch for any threats to the extraction flight. Kira remained on station, providing overwatch until the formation disappeared beyond her radar range. Only then did she turn her attention back to the compound, where Victor had waited for 7 years for rescue that had nearly come in the form of elimination. The cave entrance he'd pointed out with arranged stones deserved investigation. Whatever intelligence treasure trove might be hidden there could explain how an American soldier had been classified as a Taliban target, and possibly prevent similar failures in the future. But that mission would belong to someone else. Kira's fuel state was approaching critical levels, and her ordnance load had been expended protecting the extraction. Time to return to base and begin the long process of understanding how the impossible had become reality. Falcon Base, Ghost Rider is RTB. Mission complete, package extracted successfully. Copy Ghost Rider. Be advised, you're expected in the commander's office immediately upon landing. The consequences of invoking emergency authority were waiting for her on the ground, but Kira found that she didn't care about potential disciplinary action. Victor was alive, he was safe, and he was coming home. Whatever price she paid for that outcome was worth paying. The F-16 climbed toward cruising altitude as Kira set course for Bagram, leaving behind a compound that held 7 years of secrets and a landing zone where the impossible had become triumphantly real. Her brother was alive, and she was bringing him home. The debrief lasted 6 hours and involved personnel whose security clearances exceeded Kira's pay grade. They sat in a windowless room that smelled of coffee and tension, going through every detail of the mission from initial briefing to final extraction. Intelligence officers, operations staff, legal advisors, and at least 2 people who never identified their specific roles but asked questions that suggested intimate knowledge of classified programs. Victor sat beside her for the final 2 hours, looking older than his 38 years but unmistakably her brother. 7 years had weathered his face and added gray to his hair, but his eyes held the same stubborn determination that had driven him to enlist after 9/11 and volunteer for deployment after deployment. The story he told explained everything and nothing. His convoy had been hit by an IED outside Fallujah, just as reported. But instead of dying in the explosion, he'd been thrown clear and captured by insurgents who recognized the intelligence value of an American communications specialist. They'd sold him to a network that moved high-value prisoners across international borders, eventually ending up in the hands of Taliban leaders who saw him as a potential bargaining chip. For 7 years, he'd been moved between safe houses and compounds, kept alive because someone thought he might eventually be useful for prisoner exchanges or propaganda purposes. His captors had been careful. No videos, no public acknowledgement of his survival, nothing that would confirm his existence to American intelligence. The compound in the Korangal Valley had been his prison for the past 18 months. When surveillance satellites began showing increased activity in the area, intelligence analysts had correctly identified movement, but incorrectly assessed its nature. The figure they'd observed wasn't a Taliban leader. It was an American prisoner, whose captors had abandoned him when military pressure made the location untenable. Victor had been alone in the compound for 3 weeks, surviving on stored supplies and hopping for rescue, while intelligence officers prepared a strike package to eliminate what they believed was a high-value target. "How did you know it would be me?" Kira asked during a break in the formal questioning. Victor smiled, the same lopsided grin she remembered from childhood. "I didn't know for certain, but I'd heard rumors. Taliban fighters talk, and sometimes they mentioned an American woman pilot they called the Ghost Rider. Someone who could put bombs exactly where she wanted them, who flew like she was angry at the sky itself." He paused, studying her face with the intensity of someone who'd wondered for years if he'd ever see family again. "It sounded like my little sister, the one who always had to prove she could do anything I could do, just better. So I carved our name in the dirt and hoped that if they sent a pilot to kill me, it might be the one person who would recognize what she was looking at." The intelligence officers weren't satisfied with personal reunion stories. They wanted to know about Taliban operations, prison networks, leadership structures, and anything else Victor might have observed during 7 years of captivity. His debriefing would continue for weeks as analysts tried to extract every piece of actionable intelligence from his experience. But none of that mattered to Kira as she sat beside her brother in a sterile military conference room and tried to process the fact that he was alive. 7 years of grief, 7 years of flying missions in his memory, 7 years of carrying guilt about surviving while he hadn't, all of it recontextualized by the simple reality of his presence. Colonel Morrison entered the room as the formal debrief concluded, carrying a folder that probably contained Kira's professional fate. She'd invoked emergency authority to avoid killing her brother, disobeyed direct orders, and turned a strike mission into a rescue operation. Military justice offered few provisions for happy endings when they came at the cost of discipline and order. "Major Volkov," Morrison said, using her formal rank instead of call sign, "your actions today violated protocol, endangered operational security, and demonstrated clear insubordination." Kira stood at attention, prepared for whatever consequences awaited her. Court-martial, reduction in rank, dismissal from service, all possible outcomes for a pilot who'd chosen family over orders. "However," Morrison continued, opening the folder, "the successful extraction of American personnel from enemy territory represents a significant intelligence victory. Master Sergeant Volkov's survival and recovery will provide valuable information about enemy operations and prisoner handling." He paused, studying both siblings with the calculating gaze of someone trying to balance military necessity against human complexity. "Major Volkov, you're being recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross for actions above and beyond the call of duty.